Ooh, there goes the music. Shh. Good evening, everybody. My name is Katie Culver. If you don't know me already, I am the director of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Oh, Krista was right. I said it's too dark up here. She was right, I was wrong. Okay, I am so delighted to welcome all of you to this talk tonight with Melissa Sanchez and Natalie Yahr. We are very grateful in the Center for Journalism Ethics for the support of many groups, including the program in Chicanx and Latinx studies here at UW-Madison. The program advances interdisciplinary research and teaching on peoples, cultures, and collectives within the United States and examines the transnational dimensions of Chicanx and Latinx lives, arts, and society. We're delighted to partner with them tonight, so thank you very much for your support. We're also supported by the Journalist in Residence program, which is named for Sharon Dunwoody, a former director of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication and supporter of the Center for Journalism Ethics. She was just a rock star champion of a person, and we lost her way too soon and are very grateful that the Office of Strategic Communication has named this program in her honor. It supports the world's top journalists, including people like Melissa, coming to this campus to help educate our students and also to learn from our faculty, researchers, and instructors. So without further ado, let me get to the introductions. Melissa is a Chicago-based investigative reporter at ProPublica, where she writes about immigration and labor. Her reporting on Chicago's punitive ticketing and debt collection system helped prompt major reforms, including the cancellation of 55,000 driver's license suspensions and millions of dollars in debt forgiveness. If you haven't seen this series, I highly recommend you go and check it out. It speaks to the power of journalism when people ask really important questions beyond their own lived experience. Melissa was part of a team of reporters who examined conditions at shelters for unaccompanied immigrant children and was among the first reporters to document the growing number of Central American teenagers who work in factories. Later, she and her colleague, Miriam Jamil, examined conditions for immigrant workers on Wisconsin dairy farms, which you'll hear about tonight, and that reporting prompted a federal civil rights investigation and led to the creation of an $8 million fund to build housing for farm workers. Melissa, I am very proud to say, is a two-time finalist for the Anthony Shadid Award for Journalism Ethics, which is given out by our center. Natalie Yahr is a Madison-based reporter for the statewide news nonprofit Wisconsin Watch, where she writes about how Wisconsin schools and institutions are preparing people for family-sustaining jobs. Really, really important term today, and how we could all do better at that. Before that, she covered the Madison area economy for the Capital Times, where she tracked local union drives, explored why home care workers in Wisconsin make so little, investigated a moving company whose surprise bills sometimes topped $30,000, and profiled more than 60 local entrepreneurs. Natalie has won awards from the Milwaukee Press Club, the Society of Professional Journalists, and the Wisconsin Newspaper Association. She's published work in Wisconsin Watch, of course, and the Cap Times, as well as WWNO-FM, Scalawag, the Columbia Journalism Review, and the New York Times. Natalie is also a member of the advisory board of the Center for Journalism Ethics. So please welcome both of our guests for tonight's important discussion.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Katie. 1 second, let me get comfortable here. All right, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm really looking forward to this. So Melissa, up until you began reporting on dairy farms in Wisconsin, all of your work at ProPublica had focused on Chicago and Illinois. How and why did you start reporting on Wisconsin?
A lot of things were happening at the same time, but ProPublica, we were the first office that ProPublica had outside of the national office covering Illinois and Chicago, and we expanded to cover the region, the broader region of the Midwest. And by chance, just like a lot of the reporting kind of started with this institution, to be honest. I was invited in 2022 to to speak at an ethics and equity panel, and I talked about the parking ticket project. And I had just had my second kid, and it was really hard for me to leave home overnight. Like, just when you have kids, it's just complicated, and there's a lot of negotiations that have to happen at the house. And so I tried to milk it for as much as I could. And I did the talk, and I also I went to visit a farm where I'd heard of this little boy who died. This boy named Jefferson Rodriguez, who was Nicaraguan. I had been interested in dairy and the immigrants who work on dairy farms. I'd gotten a tip a few months earlier from somebody connected to my old college, Michigan State University, about conditions on dairy farms in Michigan. And I was just super intrigued with, like, just by the kind of work people do. Like, I had no idea that there were jobs still in this day and age where people lived at work and were so dependent on their employer for absolutely everything. And so the chance to come here for this talk gave me the opportunity to go start the reporting on that. And I ended up meeting the people who connected me to that little boy's father.
And when you were coming to Wisconsin, how did you go about finding people to talk to, and how did you get your reporting back to those people afterward?
Yeah, so like we knew early on that talking to immigrant workers on farms was going to be really hard for a lot of reasons. They live at work, they're kind of trapped at work in some ways. Like Wisconsin, as far as I know, still today prohibits undocumented people from getting driver's licenses. So people are afraid to like leave their homes because they can get ticketed, and it's just very expensive, and kind of increasingly it puts you at risk for deportation depending on what county that happens in. So people don't leave often. They also have like low literacy rates in Spanish. They come from like really rural communities in Mexico or Nicaragua. The technology isn't very good. They don't have a lot of access to Wi-Fi always. So we kind of knew all these things going in, and kind of the best way to find people like that was who I was most interested in, because there had been reporting in the past on dairy farms. As you all know, there's been lots of reporting about dairy in Wisconsin. It's every day in the news, but often the perspective is coming from like an economic perspective or from the farmer's perspective. And there's been very little coverage in this state that I could find that was based on the perspectives of the people who do the work of shoveling manure and milking cows. And part of that is because there aren't a ton of Spanish speakers who are in journalism in Wisconsin and have access to the jobs to do that. So all that said, like with that very first visit I had here, I went to a Mexican restaurant close to the farm where I knew this kid died, and I ended up just going into the kitchen and looking and just asking to see if anybody there was Nicaraguan. I figured that if there's Nicaraguans there, they might know the family involving this little boy. And sure enough, a guy named Pedro came out from the same community that Jose, the boys, actually no, not the same community, but they knew each other. They had worked on a farm together. And so he's the one who connected me just by chance with Jose. And then from there, it really snowballed. Like, we learned, I mean, people come here to work, and so they make dollars to send back home, and they have to send them home somehow. And typically it's by going to a little Latino grocery store and wiring money home. And so we ended up mapping out all the little tienditas, the little Mexican grocery stores across the state, and visiting them. We made flyers in Spanish, kind of explaining like we're journalists with my photo, my colleague Mariam's photo, our names and numbers, explaining that we were interested in talking to people who work on dairy farms, and people called us. It was like a lot of spaghetti on the wall. We made a lot of videos of ourselves, like, hi, I'm Melissa, in Spanish. Like, I'm looking to talk to people who work or have worked on dairy farms, and we posted them on Facebook, on different pages that were geared toward Latino communities across the state. And then at some point, too, I learned to use TikTok. Like I'm like 41. Like it's like not my demographic, but like my colleague Mariam, who's younger than me and uses TikTok for fun, was seeing that a lot of the dairy workers were making videos of themselves like dancing in the milking parlor, kind of doing silly stuff like people do. And it's like, this is where people are at. They're on TikTok. So I like got on TikTok and I made videos of myself like doing the thing, like making my appeal, and also using TikTok to find people, to like if somebody was making those videos, like I messaged them, I friended all of them. So my algorithms are really funny. We did a ton of things like to find people and bring them in, and then as we were producing stories, like it was really important. Like it's really important to me to get the stories back to those people. I don't like the idea of writing stories about people and then not having them actually access that reporting. And so that's the same methods that we used to find them were the methods that we used to get the reporting back to them. and then some. Like Jose, that little boy's father, is illiterate. He can't read in Spanish or in English. And so we wrote this beautiful, long story that he could never consume. And so we convinced our editors of ProPublica that it was worth investing in paying for somebody to make a beautiful audio version of the story. And so we found these Chilean podcasters, this woman with a gorgeous voice who read our story very slowly and gently. And then we made flyers, we made little booklets, and we had QR codes where people could go in and like listen to the story. And Jose, that boy's father, told me later that the only way that he learned like some of the details of how his son had died was from listening to that story.
At the start of Trump 2.0, you wrote about Nicaraguan immigrants in Wisconsin who were packing up their belongings and sending them home in boxes and in barrels. Why did you do that story, and what's happened to those people since, and what does that tell us about the state of things right now?
Yeah, at the start, right before Trump came into office, I was just super anxious. Like, we'd all lived through Trump 1.0, and he'd made a lot of promises on the campaign trail about what was going to happen to immigrants. And like, it was a little paralyzing. Like, can I change my beat? Can I write about something else? But you have to do your job. So I started just calling people who I knew, both in Chicago, where I live, and in Wisconsin, where I had spent a lot of time. I was calling like lawyers, advocates, researchers, probably some of the people in this room, just to see what's going on. And I ended up talking in early January with this woman who's like a community health worker in the middle of the state. Her name's Yesenia. And she was just telling me about different people she knows. And she just casually mentioned that some of the Nicaraguans she knew were packing up their things in boxes and in barrels and shipping them back to Nicaragua. And sometimes you hear a word in an interview and it just like hits you, like, and there was something visceral, like you could see it, like barrels. There were these big blue plastic barrels, and the image of that was so striking to me. It wasn't a ProPublica story. So ProPublica writes big accountability, investigative stories with the idea to create impact, blah blah blah. This was not going to be that. This was like what I imagined was like just like a little portrait of a moment. Mm-hmm. And so I talked to the people that Yesenia knew, and then
what you mean is it wasn't the type of story ProPublica usually does.
No, yes. I mean, like, it wasn't investigative, but it was like it was just a moment, but it was interesting enough, and it said something about what was happening that my editors were like, "Go, do it." And I started calling all the people I knew in Wisconsin, all the immigrants. I called Pedro, the man I met at the restaurant, and he had a box, and his coworkers had barrels, and like everybody in the community had something. And Jose, the boy's father, he didn't have one, but his brother did, and it's like it was clearly like a real thing. And so we drove up here with a photographer and kind of photographed people and the stuff that they were shipping off, and it was interesting because it was like, people were afraid, they had panicked, they were anxious, they were worried about, they weren't leaving their homes, they were afraid about what was to come, but they were also really practical. Like, if I'm gonna get deported, I don't wanna lose all the stuff that I've accumulated in this country. So Pedro was packing up his sombreros, and this one woman was packing up her high heels that she'd been accumulating. Somebody else bought a toaster oven and sent it back to Somoto in Nicaragua. Like people were getting tools on Craigslist that are really expensive to get back home. They were getting like barber snippers, like all these. I went to a Nicaraguan restaurant and I just started like going table to table talking to people, and everybody, if they didn't have a box, they knew somebody who did, and it was kind of amazing. And the story wasn't investigative and it wasn't an accountability story, but it really resonated with people like all over the country, because it kind of said like, this is how people feel in this moment. And months later, most of those people are still here. Like, at some point, Pedro stopped responding to my WhatsApp messages, and I was like, oh gosh, he's been deported. And it turned out he'd like lost his phone. So which happens. Like, I talked to his coworker who was like, oh, let me put him on the phone for you. So some of those people are still here, which kind of speaks to like how I think the immigration enforcement isn't happening at the same level as here as it is in other places.
What do you think the immigration story is in Wisconsin right now?
I mean, I'd love any tips and suggestions, but it's like a story that I feel happens, like it probably happened during Trump 1.0 here, that even though everybody knows where some undocumented immigrants work, where a lot of them work, Trump isn't sending ICE there. So I checked in with, with a prominent farmer who does a lot of immigrant advocacy work here, and he said there hadn't been anything. Like, none of the people I know know anybody who was affected. It's not to say ICE isn't doing its job here, but the numbers don't match what's happening in other places. My colleague Jeff, who's a data reporter at ProPublica, he has access to some data on ICE arrests, and I asked him to run the Wisconsin numbers before this event. And I think the monthly numbers have gone up a tiny bit compared to last year by a few dozen, but the vast majority, I think the biggest share of the arrests are tied to people with criminal records or people who are coming out of jails. It's not the roving bovino caravans of Border Patrol folks here. So people are not getting snatched off the streets the way they were in Chicago or Minnesota. It's more like the usual business here. So that's kind of what's happening, and it's like, what's the story there? And I think I'm really interested in the economy and how the Trump administration justifies like ignoring businesses that it knows rely entirely on undocumented labor. And those are kind of like difficult stories to report because you don't want to go out of your way to put people at risk, but it's true. And so I'm thinking through, how do you write about that right now?
You're talking, for example, about the fact that it's just like a known thing that the dairy industry is powered by undocumented labor.
Exactly. And I mean, that story's been written, and it's written a lot, but I feel like it still needs to be written. Like, agriculture, without the immigrants who do agricultural work, like, I'm not sure how this country would survive. And that, like, how much are we willing to pay for strawberries? How much are we willing to pay for milk? But at the moment, there's been a great reluctance to hit those industries. And maybe it's because Americans won't do the work. These are kind of all things everybody already knows, but I'm still drawn to it, even though it's like a known thing, because that's what this state is known for. It's an important part of the economy.
I don't imagine this is an easy time for any immigration reporter. Don't envy the work you have to do. But for anyone with immigrant relatives or loved ones, it could feel all the more personal and more risky. What advice do you have for immigration journalists or aspiring immigration journalists who might worry about the implications for their loved ones?
I don't think there's a really good answer for that. It's hard. I was at a conference for Latino journalists last summer, and somebody asked that. And somebody else in the room answered it by saying that they had stopped writing about immigration for that reason. This administration is coming after all sorts of people, including reporters. So I think you need to do what you feel safe doing and what protects you and your family first. For me, like, I'm the daughter of immigrants. My dad came here illegally when he was a teenager. My mom came here as a kid legally. My dad became a naturalized citizen. My husband's the son of immigrants. We speak Spanish. I look the way I look. My last name's Sanchez. I started carrying around my passport when ICE was doing its thing in Chicago. We try to raise our kids in Spanish. And I remember one morning driving my two kids to school, and I said something to the kids like, stop hitting your sibling or whatever, so, something like, we were driving. I don't even remember what I said, but apparently I said it in Spanish. And Lucia, my 5-year-old, says, Mama, don't speak Spanish because the ICE police are going to arrest you. And I was like, crap, like, and I had to explain to her, oh, actually, we have this special magic paper called a passport. And she's like, oh, do I have a passport? Does Abuela have a passport? And she started naming all the people. And it's hard. And like I said, like, this administration is going after people, so it's difficult. Like, the other day, my colleague Jody Cohen and I wrote a story following up on something we'd done last year, and the spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security came after us on Twitter, and it's not the first time that happens. And we prepared a response on Twitter. We ran it through the editors because it's not a small thing when the Trump administration is literally going after you. And we responded oh, actually, whatever. We clarified whatever she had said, and the first comment under that was anti-Semitic. And it's it's a hard moment. And I think whether you're Latino or Jewish or Black, this administration is coming after people. So I think you have to do what you feel the most comfortable with. I deleted all my kids' photos from social media, which was painful because I connect with a lot. I mean, I use it not just for work, but like to connect with my friends from college, with my family in Mexico and in Salvador. And I just deleted my kids because I don't want that to be fodder for anybody.
Yeah. And speaking of being a parent, how do you talk with your kids about the things you write about, some of it being really difficult?
I don't know if I am doing the right thing, if I'm making the right choices. Like, I'm pretty straightforward with people as much as I can, and I try to behave that way with my kids. So they know what I write about. My older one understands more. My older one was like really invested in the story about Jefferson, the boy who died on the farm. And they know what a skid steer is. They know what happened to this boy's body. They know what happened with the law enforcement like mistake. And I feel compelled to answer my kids' questions. Like, we'll listen to NPR on the way into school. And so stuff comes up and they ask, can you pause it? It's like, no, you can't pause the radio. But I'll have to lower the volume and explain, like, oh, this is the decision on trans kids, or this is whatever. I try to tell them what's happening, and it's really hard. Like, after that story about Jefferson published, there was a day I was driving with Sammy, my oldest, and Jose called me about something related to the story, and we were talking, and I was about to get off the phone with Jose, and then Sammy in the back seat is like, can I say something to Jose? And I'm like, oh my God, what is my kid gonna say? My kid's like a lunatic. And I'm like, okay. And I head over the phone, and I'm like just praying, and like, my heart's over here. And then Sammy in Spanish says to Jose, like, Jose, I'm so sorry that your son died. And like, that was all. And like, I started crying, like Jose started crying, and it was a really intense moment for all of us. And I think, like, if I leave my kids with anything, like, I hope it's a little bit of this empathy and ability to connect. And like, I hate that they have to know that we're bombing other countries, that we're like, arresting US citizens, that we're doing all of these things that like, I can't, like, we couldn't have imagined. But I think it's better that they know than not know.
Yeah. You and your colleagues were recently named finalists for the Anthony Shadid Award for Journalism Ethics, and as Katie mentioned, you've been a finalist twice, actually. This most recently was for your reporting on the more than 230 Venezuelan men deported to a prison in El Salvador. How did that project come about?
So that project involved a lot of people at ProPublica and some Venezuelan journalists who we ended up partnering with. And for me, like, my entree was kind of unique and personal. This was like at the beginning of Trump 2.0. I had done that story on the boxes, and I was still like, oh my God, how am I going to cover this? Like, it was just really overwhelming. And I decided to start going to immigration court. There's an immigration court in Chicago, and I would go in person or I would observe virtually. And I was just going every single day. I wasn't writing anything. I was going to write an immigration court story. I had little scenes for an immigration court story. And one day in court, like, there's the detained docket is for immigrants who are in detention, and they Zoom, or they do a video call in to court. And one day I was in this courtroom, and then one of the people who Zoomed in was this guy named Albert, and it was like a hearing unlike anything I had seen before up until, like, in those weeks that I'd been watching. Albert was like a young Venezuelan guy, tattooed. You could see his tattoos even like past his, like, underneath his orange like jumpsuit. And he was an asylum seeker, like a lot of Venezuelans were. And he was asked he ended up giving this like long testimony. Like, it was a bond hearing where he was basically asking the judge to let him out on bond while he waited for his immigration case to like proceed. And that hearing, he ended up getting questioned about a lot of things, but the main issue, the government was accusing him of being a member of the Tren de Aragua gang, like the big Venezuelan gang that Trump likes to talk about. And the reasons that they articulated in court for that labeling was his tattoos. Like, he had a tattoo of an angel holding a gun. And then also because of a TikTok video that he had made on his TikTok account, that now I was like an expert in TikTok, so I knew all about it. Like there was a video that he made dancing, like a lot of people make on TikTok, to the sound of somebody shouting, "Te va a agarrar el tren de Aragua," ooh, which means the tren de Aragua is going to get you, like the boogeyman kind of sound. And a lot of Venezuelans, like all over the country, all over Latin America, were making silly videos with that sound because there's become this stigma that all Venezuelans are tren de Aragua members. So it was like a joke. It was like to ridicule this. But because of that video and because of his tattoo of an angel holding a gun, the government called him a Tren de Aragua member. And I was just shocked. And this is like a long answer to your question, but I went back to the newsroom. I told my editors, I'm like, this is super interesting. Like, I want to do like a narrative story about this guy and what happened. And you know, the judge had denied him bond, but she said, come back in 10 days, your final asylum hearing, depending on what happens, you might get to stay in this country. But before those 10 days were up, he was sent to El Salvador among that group of more than 230 guys. And it was so stunning that something that it felt so big, and like I'm just the one person in Chicago, but suddenly like one of the many people that our government had sent to a prison in El Salvador where they were tortured. Like I had heard this guy's story, so I just felt really personally motivated. And then my colleagues, Micah Rosenberg and Perla Treviso, had already done a lot of reporting on the Trump administration, sending immigrants to countries that they were not from, to Panama, to Guantanamo. And so they were really interested for different reasons. And the three of us got together and started putting together a project to document like, who were these men that the Trump administration called sick criminals and gang members? Like, was that true? And we didn't quite know what we were getting into when we started. It was a project that just escalated and escalated and escalated, and we eventually created this big interactive database with little stories about every single one of the men, including Albert, my guy from court, who I eventually talked to. I talked to his mom. Like, he was a very sweet guy. But we did this in collaboration with a group of Venezuelan journalists who were also super interested in this.
Mm-hmm. There's so many potential immigration stories right now, far more than you can cover, and there's so many reporters covering immigration. How do you decide what to pursue right now?
I don't always know. And like when Midway Blitz was happening in Chicago and things were happening like in my neighborhood, it was really overwhelming, especially when the New York Times and the Washington Post and everybody was in town. All the newspapers in town were covering it. Like, we at ProPublica do a specific kind of reporting, like longer, in-depth accountability reporting, and it was hard to figure out like which of the many egregious things that are happening, like, do we focus on? Especially when tomorrow something even worse could happen. So, like I said earlier, like it was kind of paralyzing. And luckily, like late last year, my editors just made a call. Like, we had to pick one thing and just put blinders on and do it. And they ended up deciding that there was a big raid at an apartment building on the south side of Chicago, where the government, you might have seen on social media or the news, but the government sent in like Black Hawk helicopters, 300 heavily armed agents from like every agency that you can think of. They did something that we have never seen in an American city in this way. They went into a building to get rid of 37 Venezuelan immigrants, mostly Venezuelans, and it was just a stunning use of force. And they claimed it was taken over by a Tren de Aragua, which now I was an expert in. And what we found was just almost nothing to back the government's claims. So that story, it was like an editor decision, thank God, and we put a lot of resources into it. And it was difficult because it was such a crowded like media landscape, and everybody was covering that, but we were able to do something that nobody else had done, like identify, I think 21 or 22 of the Venezuelans who were taken that night. Nobody else had done that, and like we ended up interviewing about 15 of them, including a bunch of guys who were still in detention or who had been deported. And I think that story it helped to show the contrast. Like, a lot of the reporting over the past year has been, to take the government's words and see, is it true? It's basically fact checking. but at this kind of crazy scale. Like that story became like a really vivid narrative with the testimonies of all these people. But at the end of the day, you had like the government's assertions and this crazy use of force, and then the reality that it was like a bunch of poor people who were working, barely no criminal records, no evidence that we could identify that any of them were gang members. And I think that kind of helped illustrate what we've seen throughout this administration. They have a narrative that they want to sell about the people they're deporting, and it's not often backed by evidence.
And you've since uncovered even more about that situation and about using newer records you've acquired.
We recently reported on how the property owner and manager had given permission to the government to go in and do that raid. So that was startling. Like, we got some of the arrest forms for some of the men taken that night, and the arrest forms where you typically would say, this guy's a criminal, this guy's terrible, has done bad things, and needs to get deported. Instead, they just said, they said nothing about Trinidad. And they said at the top, like, we had verbal and written consent from the property owner to go in, and we had information about what units were occupied by squatters. And so the government claimed, or the property owner claimed, that these people were squatting, and that's why it's weird. Like, the government went in, like the federal, DHS, Border Patrol, they went in to clear an apartment of squatters. But what we learned through our reporting is, like, the Venezuelans who were there, almost all of them thought they were paying rent. But then we found Americans who lived in the building, like U.S. citizens, who were pretending to be managers and were like collecting rent from the Venezuelans. Like, there was some crazy stuff going on. But anyway, so what we reported was like this just audacious, I mean, a property owner of a distressed property, like, terrible code violations. Like, you walk in there, it smells like urine, there's like mold everywhere, the elevator doesn't work. There was a woman on the 3rd floor with no legs who was basically trapped in her apartment. Like, this building should have been condemned. And the landlord had tried to evict people at different points, but people, like, it was a messy, complicated situation. Like, half of the people who lived there were African American, the other half were Venezuelan. But like, to know that at the very end of all of this huge show of force, like, they went in there to clear supposed squatters with the landlord's consent. It's not what I think most of us would imagine our dollars going to these agencies should be used for. Yeah. And at the end of it, like, they didn't charge anybody criminally for that. Like, not a single immigrant. They've all been deported for the most part. They've been quietly getting deported, and not just deported. They've been getting what's called the word escapes me. They're getting that kind of deportation that you give to good immigrants, like immigrants of good moral character, that allows them to apply to return. So it's just wild that after all of this, they have nothing to show for it.
So I first interviewed you back in 2018 for a guide. I was writing on how reporters can minimize harm to sources and avoid what we sometimes call extractive practices. You had some excellent insights and reflections on your own experience. If folks don't know about this guide or haven't read this guide, I really recommend checking it out. It's on the Center for Journalism Ethics website and is now available in Spanish and maybe soon in French. But I'm curious now, given the increased risk to immigrants under the Trump administration, what kind of precautions are you taking with your sources these days?
So, I mean, a lot of my colleagues end up using Signal to talk to people, especially government sources. Like, that's not something I even bother trying with immigrants. We use WhatsApp, which is encrypted, and hopefully it's good enough. I've noticed a lot of the immigrants I talk to have set disappearing messages, which they're doing on their own, which is cool. I mean, we don't name a lot of people. I've always kind of had the practice of really explaining to people what the potential risks are of talking to me. And I outline all the risks that I know of, and I kind of try to make clear there's risks that I don't know could happen. And like we don't use composite characters or made up, synonyms for people. So so but I have kind of come to an agreement with my editors that like in these kinds of cases, we can use like one first name or one last name, and that's good enough, and we just have to explain in the story why we're not fully identifying somebody. But I think that's what we've been doing, and that seems to provide people enough comfort in this moment. I haven't had any serious consequences recently, but I think we're all kind of aware that it could happen. Our lawyers are constantly telling us like to develop a system of discarding notes, and that affects more like the government sources who might get in trouble with their bosses if they leak information. But I think immigrants too can appreciate that if like after you're done with a story, maybe a month later you can throw everything out. So that I think that's a good practice to get into. But I think we're all figuring it out.
Yeah. I think we've got time for one more question before we open it up to questions. And this is one I particularly want to ask you, which is something I and some other reporters I know have wondered about, had questions about, is when we think about investigative reporting, sometimes we think, or sometimes maybe we see on movies or TV, the kind of a confrontational approach, kind of a folks who are brave and not worried about making somebody else upset or whatever. And I've talked to reporters who very much feel like that's not their style, who don't love conflict and feel maybe stressed out by it. And then maybe think, well, I must not be cut out for investigative work. Can you talk a little about how you describe your personality as a journalist, and what are the hardest parts for you, and how do you still make it work?
I mean, I'm totally in that camp. Like, I hate confrontation. I get so nervous. Like, I mean, I'm nervous around police officers. I'm nervous around white guys in suits. Like, it's just like people in power. I'm like, oh my God. So I have to really like, it's super easy for me to walk into a restaurant kitchen and like talk to an immigrant. Like, I got that. But yeah, I struggle with that. I feel like I'm like the way that I talk to people, like I myself, I kind of explain who I am. I kind of say like, I give my song and dance about like my family and like why I care, to kind of try to establish like a personal connection. And that works with like some people, but then you have to do the other part too. Like if you're holding people accountable, and I mean, I've cried during interviews, like when I get really nervous. So I feel like, why am I doing this job? But I mean, it's hard. Like I prep a lot. Like before this, I wrote an entire script for myself. Like when I get nervous, I have to like really overly prepare, write down every question, every possible answer, and like take deep breaths and do it. And I'm never going to be that kind of journalist who can go in and like, be the bad cop. Like I'm lucky that I can partner with some of those people in my newsroom, but when I'm by myself, like I struggle a little bit, and I just have to go in with as much information as I can, and I might not walk out with everything, but that's who I am. That's something I'm working on. On my review this year, I wrote that I want to get better at talking to law enforcement. I think, like, if anybody has tips, I'll take them. I think we all have like our strong characteristics and our the ones that are weaker, and that's something that I would like to develop. But seriously, like at ProPublica, we have a lot of great reporters who are awesome at that, and I am awesome at something else. So.
Yes, exactly. Wonderful. I think we're going to be taking some questions from folks in the audience.
Okay, thank you so much. Really wonderful conversation. I'm going to give all of you a chance to think about your questions, so I'm going to invent and then take the liberty of asking the question myself. So when we're ready for your questions, just please wait for our wonderful student fellows here in the Ethics Center to get to you, because we want to make sure that the folks on the who are watching this on live stream and recording can hear your questions. So I'm going to first ask. I was incredibly moved by a lot of your responses, and it's very clear that empathy is a huge part of what you do and who you are. In your journalism practice, how do you balance that empathy with your ethical obligations? How do you the idea of neutrality, the idea of independence, the idea of reducing harm, how does that all intertwine with empathy for you?
No, it's a really good question. This has come up a lot in the past year. When you talk to people, I need something from them. It's like a real transactional kind of thing. I go in and I say, I'm not here to help you. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an advocate. Like, I'm here selfishly at the end of the day to do a story about X, Y, and Z. And people trust you. And then sometimes they need something. Like all these guys I wrote about who were sent to Seco, or the guys most recently taken in this raid, a lot of them have come back to me after giving me great interviews. One guy called me from Caracas to say, like, can you send me $50? Like, my teeth hurt. I need to go to a dentist. One of the guys who was taken at this raid in Chicago, he's currently in Panama. He calls me every day. I've probably missed a call from him. He doesn't have any money to finish making the trip from Panama to Venezuela. And I've had to tell him and his mother and his girlfriend, like, I'm so sorry. I wish I could help you, but if I did, like, that compromises my ability to write about this, like, and to write about you. And I don't want that to be challenged. Like, what I wrote about you is true. But if somebody knows that I gave you $50 to fix your teeth, like, people might get the wrong impression. They might get the wrong impression. They might think that I am a social worker or an advocate, et cetera. And I'm not. Like, I'm not here to help them. Like, at the end of the day, I'm here to do journalism. But it can be really confusing. And I was getting so many calls last year I was like crying about it at home. Like, like with this raid in the fall, there was a woman who had 3 kids, 3 little girls, all under the age of 4, and she ended up at a homeless shelter after the raid. And I was like, great, I get to meet somebody in person, because most of them were like in detention or had been already deported. And I met her, and it was like the day of like a huge blizzard in Chicago. It was an awful blizzard, and her kids didn't have coats. Everything had been taken in the raid. And I went home, and I was like, I called my editor. I'm like, gosh, I have 2 kids. I have so many coats. I'm like, can I give them coats? And he's like, my editor's he's great. He's like, there's a line. You're getting very close to the line. And that was so hard for me. I tried to go around my editor. I called like the lawyer. I called the different people in the newsroom. And at the end of the day, luckily they all told me, like, no. You can tell them that there's advocacy groups. You can point them to like nonprofits, but you cannot help them. And I think when I've hit those moments, like I ask for help, because sometimes like I can't navigate it myself.
Thank you so much. Okay, what questions can we take from the audience? Just raise your hand and our fine fellows will come to you. There's one here and one, oh, well, let's start up there. And then there's one right there.
All right, how are you? Thank you so much for your talk this evening. My name is Erica Yisi. I'm the Indigenous Affairs reporter with PBS Wisconsin, so I report on Wisconsin's 12 Native American tribes. One day in late January, I was not assigned a story, and we received a tip that there is very active ICE presence in western Wisconsin. And although it's not my beat, I was available and did what we do as journalists, and you jump in the car and you go and cover the story. So I went to western Wisconsin, right by the bridge to St. Croix County, close to Hudson and Baldwin, where there is significant ICE activity and taking documented and or undocumented people, really based off of racial profiling. It was a very cold and difficult day to do this on the ground enterprise reporting, because we went out there with no confirmed interviews. The Hudson mayor would not talk to me. Baldwin law enforcement, no one would talk to me except for a community leader who runs a community board on a Facebook page, who was able to give us a really exclusive interview of what she has seen of ICE activity, specifically on the farms that you've mentioned. So my question to you is 2 things. One, why do you think there is not really any reporting on significant ICE activity in western Wisconsin, with people maybe assuming that they would be in Milwaukee, the bigger cities, they would be in Madison, which they are in both places, but it's far more profound in western Wisconsin, in Hudson and in Baldwin. So why are we not seeing enough reporting beyond my report that's there? And 2, my question is, since that report, I received an abundance of online hate. I've been called a black, you can fill in the blank. They've also targeted my source in the story, and now I'm in a battle with the powers that be, and the label behind you, to take care of these comments that are on the platform. So again, one, why do you think there is not enough reporting on federal agents in Wisconsin, specifically in Western Wisconsin? And then on a personal level, how do you manage online hate? Thank you.
Thank you for your work. I would love to see that. I mean, I should have said it. I had heard that there was stuff closer to the border with Minnesota. So I don't know if it's those same, like the same Border Patrol crews that are hanging out there. I mean, I think it's far away, right? It's just far. And there aren't, I don't think there's a ton of local journalists out there who are as connected to those communities as there are in places like Madison or Milwaukee. And I can't pretend to know Wisconsin the way you do, so I could be wrong, but that was my sense generally when doing the reporting on dairy farms. Like, I don't live in Wisconsin. Like, I'm not from here. Like, why did it take a reporter from Chicago to write about what happened to this little kid? Like in Dane, where there's actually a lot of reporters. Like, I think there's not enough reporters who have the time or the skills, like in terms of language or community connections, sometimes to do those stories. I don't know if that's exactly what happened in your situation. And then as for the hate, like, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry you have to deal with that. Like, I have to deal with that. It sucks. Like, I don't know how many hateful, racist, sexist, like, you name the ism. And it's even worse when it's perpetuated by the people in power. So I mean, I laugh about it. I delete them. If they're really bad, I'll share them with our lawyers in case there's some crazy person who wants to do something, if it's a threat. And we have something called Delete Me. I don't know if you know what this is, but our company has access to this thing called Delete Me that helps delete your profile, like I think it makes it harder for your home address to be found in places. So we do that. Like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I haven't gotten this much racism since maybe 15 years ago. It's been a long time. Sometimes it comes from unexpected places. And then as for, I don't know what to tell you about getting those things taken off the internet. I hope that you can talk to your managers or your managers' managers about that and get that resolved if it's painful for you. I can't imagine that. I'm sorry.
This is a massive legal and ethical issue that's roiling. Eric works for public media, that is roiling public media outlets that are owned or whose licenses are owned by public universities, because the stance is that the public universities cannot moderate comments in compliance with their First Amendment obligations. A position with which I disagree. But many of these public university license holders are not moderating comments on the public media sites. It's a massive issue.
That's so interesting. Yeah, we don't have comments at ProPublica. I don't know if it's because of that, but like Facebook has comments, like Twitter has comments. Like, I have an inbox I have a phone number that people call. That's complicated.
It sure is. And over here, next.
Can you speak a little bit about the farm workers? I know that during the Bracero, when people were given jobs during World War II, there were a lot of Mexican workers that came to fill positions. But it's always there's always this kind of disconnect the way we look at undocumented workers. There's this idea that people are okay if they're documented, meaning they're on a work permit or something. But the truth is, no matter what country you're coming from, people are here illegally, and they get here and then they get the paperwork. So aren't most farm workers, in fact, documented? Because the need is so great?
No.
Oh, they're not?
No, I think it depends on what sector of agriculture you're talking about. So in dairy, there's no like guest worker program because it's year-round work. There's guest worker programs for seasonal work, like picking berries or whatever. And increasingly, I think over the past 15 years, like that kind of seasonal work, farmers have increasingly turned to the guest worker program to import workers temporarily. So those workers do have papers. I think when I worked in Washington State like 20 years ago, that was not really a thing, but just in these 2 decades, like the numbers have really turned, in part because the undocumented population that previously did this work is aging, and their kids don't want to do the work. So it's just harder to find people to do it.
So the guest workers are coming from another country that the United States is working with that country to bring those people across the border or to land on a.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, like the U.S. I don't know how much actively they do to recruit it, but they allow that to happen, and so there's contractors who will do that work and go to Mexico or go to Haiti or go to whatever country, Jamaica, and bring in workers. So that happens for a lot of the like picking berries or apples or asparagus, tomatoes. But and different states have different levels of that. In Wisconsin, with dairy in particular, like that's excluded from that program.
Well, why would it? I don't know. There's very few people that do farm work now. Unless you're on a small family farm, there's very few. The need is so great that I can't imagine. I suppose you can look at a lot of service industry and say maybe the same thing, but it's. I guess I was under the impression they could fill something out.
This is the open secret that Melissa's talking about when she talks about the dairy industry, for example.
Yeah, and there's been like trickery around it. Like there's my friend Maria Perez, who worked at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel for a little bit. She wrote about this scam that some farmers had found because they can't legally access immigrant workers the way other agricultural businesses can. They were using something called a TN visa, which you can bring in professionals, and they were bringing in these Mexicans, like some were professional engineers, some knew what they were getting into, and they were bringing them in to like milk cows and to shovel manure, which is not what the program was intended for, and that's like a scam that kind of comes and goes. But otherwise, there's no legal program. That's why a lot of the dairy, like some really prominent dairy farmers, particularly from this state, have been advocating for immigration reform because they know what they need, and I think like there's kind of like a wink, wink, nod, nod to it. And then from what I've seen, and there's people in this room who know more about agriculture than I do, but like once people do get documented, like whether through marriage or if their kid grows up and can help petition for them to become a citizen or a resident, like you get out of that business. Like you do not keep doing farm work because it's too dangerous, it's too hard, it doesn't pay enough. And so once people have like paperwork to leave, they do. Like in Wisconsin, you had a ton of Nicaraguan immigrants coming in the past 5 or 7 years, and a lot of them came seeking asylum, and because they came in through this other process, instead of like crossing illegally and absconding from authorities, they were crossing illegally and then saying, hey guys, I'm here seeking asylum, and that put them on a different path, and that path allowed them to eventually get work permits if they stayed on that path. Those people were not working on farms. Like Pedro and all his friends, they work in restaurants, they work in other jobs that are less dangerous and that pay better.
And I'll just give a quick shout out to my colleague Paul Kiefer at Wisconsin Watch, who's been doing a lot of coverage of the various types of guest worker programs and some of the very nuanced things about Wisconsin's economy and immigration.
Go right, Lalitha, right there. Sorry, I won't make you move.
So this is kind of a big picture question. So over about the last century, we've had successive waves of nativist panic and draconian, cruel, spectacular enforcement. And during the whole, basically the last 100 years, the country has continued to rely on undocumented labor in many sectors. Is that something, is this episode that we're going through another part of that cycle, or is this something that's really changing? What do you think? Of course, we can't necessarily know, but what do you see?
I don't know if I'm qualified enough to answer that. I think there's like a pendulum, and we're in one direction. We have midterms coming up. I'm assuming it's gonna swing back a little bit. I'm 41. I have never seen anything like this. I don't think when my parents came it looked like that, but Operation Wetback was what, like in the 60s, 50s? Like, I don't know. It's all over the world though. It's not just here. Like the hate for people who don't look like the natives from that country. I don't know enough. There's probably historians in this room. I don't know the answer to that, but it feels like it's a pendulum. It's going to move back in the other direction a little bit. I don't know how much of what's happened can be undone. What do you think?
I don't know, but it's a question I've been asking to different people who come through just to see what they say.
Then we have a next question up here.
First, I just want to thank you for your work. ProPublica is like top tier journalism every single time it comes across my feed. I just moved here from Des Moines, Iowa, and I was very involved with raid preparation, or I was involved in raid preparation defense on top of other protest activism stuff in the community. And one thing, it's Des Moines has a decently healthy journalism scene, but one thing I ran into, I lived in a co-op for a year and a half that was majority immigrant, both documented and undocumented, and basically kind of like the summer before the 24 election and then to this past winter break. And there are not many, compared to Chicago, Wisconsin, Star Tribune, there's really not that much coverage at all of the immigrant community, despite Polk County having the most immigrants per capita in the state of the 99 counties. And my question is, in more news deserty places where journalists might not have the community connections to have trust with immigrant communities, that, you know, all the things you laid out while you were talking of, you know, first name and not last name, or the different things you do to protect somebody, because telling someone's story or a community's story protects them in the end, but puts a target on their back immediately after you hit the publish button. And so do you have any advice for journalists in those smaller communities like, you know, Rapid City or Des Moines or Bismarck, or places where there might be immigrants are a large part of the community, but the people tasked with having that democratic infrastructure to keep them safe, how do you build those relationships in a way that still meets the moment and doesn't, you know, isn't 5 years from now, or, yeah. That's a little random, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's hard. So the question is more for how do journalists in those places make the connections, or the other way around? How do people like you build the relationships with journalists?
How can journalists start building those connections and start covering those communities where, simply because people aren't coming to them or they don't have that, like I would have journalists ask me to connect them with people, but I couldn't without, you know, that person's permission.
Right. No, and that's how a lot of journalists do it. Like I generally try to avoid dealing with advocates because I feel like people are often too protective and they want to, like, I don't know, control the story, which I would just rather go around them and go directly to the people, which is what I did in Wisconsin. The vast majority of the people we talked to were people we met through word of mouth, through the little tiendita visits that we would do, through my little Facebook videos. I think, but if the reporter doesn't speak Spanish and have like a comfort, or whatever language, a comfort in doing that kind of like it's just street reporting, essentially. I do think it's really important to find all the advocates, find the U's, find the churches, find the schools. I find schools to be great. Like, ESL teachers in elementary schools and high schools are the best. They're the most connected. They know their kids, they know the kids' parents, and they end up like, bringing them food and helping them. They end up doing way more than just teaching English. So I think like if those reporters can make those connections with like not the official advocates, but I feel like community health workers and ESL teachers are just a great place. And if you can like build a relationship with that person, and have them trust you, then kind of the doors start opening up. And those were people who helped us here in Wisconsin too, to connect with people in Whitewater, people on farms, teachers and community health workers. So I guess I would encourage them to try that if like language or time is a barrier to doing just door knocking. Like I spent a lot of time for different stories, like, knocking on 100 doors in like an apartment building or in a trailer park where there were people who I was interested in. And like maybe 1 out of every 15 or 20 would open the door and maybe talk to me. Like the odds are really, really low. But if you have the time, like that's, to me, the best way to go about it. But people can still be really afraid. So in some cases, like having somebody with authority, like a priest or a teacher say, I give my blessing. Like Melissa's trying to do something good, you can talk to her. Then that can help too.
Can I ask a follow-on on that, to the second part of the question, which is what do you as a journalist wish that some advocates were doing differently in terms of connecting communities with reporters?
I mean, for like selfishly, like I would like them to give me everything and connect me to their people and not present a barrier. I mean, I think treat the people you're working with like more dignity. They're adults and they can make decisions. Like that is really frustrating when there's like this paternalism about it. I understand where they're coming from. Like, yes, I also don't want your clients to get deported, but like my job is not to protect them. Like that's your job. But so I guess they're doing their job. But I feel like know more about the reporters you're reaching out to. And I try to send people, like when I'm really interested in something, I'll send them a long explanation of here's who I am, here's why I care, here's like examples of my work, and like read it and like meet the people and like vet them. And I mean, a lot of people in Wisconsin did that with me. Like they vetted me, like, and then they felt like, okay, she seems to be honest and is doing something that we can get behind. Then they would help me. So I think those meetings are helpful. And you don't have to help everybody. There's journalists who like I wouldn't tell my parents to talk to, but I mean, I think journalism can help. It doesn't always help, but I think in some cases you do want information to get out both to the people you're working with and the broader community. And like the work I do, I wanted to reach people with power, people at local, state, federal levels who can make changes, often whether it's about immigration or housing or whatever it is. And so there's like a reason why journalism matters. And so I think giving journalists a chance, hearing them out, and you can say no, but I think that could help.
Well, those journalists that you wouldn't allow to talk to your parents, we'll put them on the naughty list and they'll never be invited to come and speak with the Center for Journalism Ethics. Was there another hand over here? There's one up here in front.
Thank you for this very compelling conversation all around. I want to say I personally knew Anthony, and you are exactly the kind of person that I could, just knowing that you were shortlisted for that award. I met him in 2006 in the war in Lebanon. You're amazing.
Thank you.
I would have a question around the issue of empathy, like you not being able to give those codes, right? And that conversation, which I think for people out of journalism, they would find absurd, like just quietly give them, etc. And that's something we struggle a lot with covering the greater Middle East, because there's a lot of hospitality of people not only giving you tea and fruit, but bearing their raw insides to you, right? That's one issue that's very complicated. But what I'm wondering is, in the environment right now, where rule of law, civilian law, everything is upended. Nothing is, there's nothing that you can really safely rely on, right? Happening very quick in real time. Are there conversations happening in newsrooms about innovations that need to happen? Not going towards activism per se, but I mean, when the rule of law is upended, right? Like, I don't know if we can continue journalism as it stands. Like, are there conversations happening about needing to innovate or change things that typically wouldn't be the case?
That's a good question. I'll have to think about it. I think we've had some moments recently where editors will ask questions that seem so basic, like with the shootings in Minnesota, and like, you know, ICE is killing people. And one of my editors was like what's happening? Like, why don't local police protect people? And like my initial reaction is like, what are local police supposed to do? And this isn't, I don't know if this is innovative, but it's like very basic, kind of like, let's step back and like really like ask questions that are so obvious, but maybe they're not. Like, I'm rethinking like the premise of some of this. Like, my editor asked that, and I was like, what do you expect? Like, nobody's gonna call the police on ICE. But it was actually like a really good question, and like, you know, I disagreed with the whole premise, but I was like, I will go forth and answer this. And it was just fascinating to discover that like different agencies in different states behave differently, and like maybe what was happening in Chicago wasn't what was happening in Minnesota. So I don't know if it's the same thing, but I think given how outrageous some things have become, like, I think just it's not like a whole rethinking of what we're doing. Maybe some of the editors are doing that, but I think there is like a push to just examine everything, even the things that we think that we knew. And that's resulted in some like fruitful reporting that is interesting. I don't know. I mean, we've invested so much in immigration reporting. Like, everybody at ProPublica is an immigration reporter right now. And it's like, that's not really true, but like we have a Slack. There's like 150 or so journalists, or I don't know how many people there are, but like 100 of them are in our Slack. Like, it's the coolest group in town. Like, everybody, I think I don't know if that's innovative. I think we're pouring more resources into this. I'll have to give it more thought. How do you have any ways that you see journalism maybe changing because of this?
It's not a popular thought. It angers a lot of more conventional journalism, let's say, Western legacy perspectives. But I think that in the Middle East, which is where I reported from for years, I think that community journalism and kind of distrust, and not per se advocate gatekeeping, but there is much more of a who can we trust and why. And I think that there has never really been, like, in some cases, there's a distrust. And we're talking about it's an inverse situation than what's happening here, right? Where I don't think there is this perspective here. I think not, anyway. We don't, that here you don't feel that the Western legacy papers are diminishing your story, right? I think there's a feeling that we desperately need them right now, which is not always the case. They don't necessarily serve that same nuanced role in a lot of the reporting in the Middle East. So, no, I don't have an answer because I'm desperately seeking one myself, but I think that what I'm just seeing is, I hate to say it, but maybe to a degree, Black Lives Matter, when that rose up, is like Western legacy papers were not keeping up with what was happening, and that's when social media and people turning to that, and then the beats increased, and I don't know.
That's really interesting. I mean, I do think that I don't think that's totally true. I think there's a lot of distrust in media, in like ProPublica and whatever, depending on what your political position is. Like, I don't know how many times DHS has told me that I work for a liberal rag and like has just discounted everything. So there's, depending on where you sit, like, I mean, there's Fox News, there's Breitbart, or there's like the rest of us. And one thing we're doing, maybe this, I mean, maybe this answers your question a little bit more. Like, we recently announced at ProPublica, I think we've announced this, we're starting like a team to do more stuff on YouTube. And like, I had no idea, but apparently, is it YouTube? Yeah. Like that, like there's like a lot of people from all over the political spectrum like get their news on YouTube. Like, I had no idea. And that's interesting. Like, we're gonna hire people to kind of create content based on our stories to put on YouTube in order to reach across like the whole, like like, I want my stories to get read by people. Like, I don't care, like, I don't want them just to get read by advocates. That's gonna get us nowhere. I want it to reach everybody. So I think that is something, I don't know if it's because of this moment in terms of the rule of law point, but I do think there's just increasing distrust and like polarization, and like we're missing a lot of people. And so I do think that's something that we are trying to figure out ways to reach different kinds of people. Like a story about like the VA cutting like healthcare, like all sorts of people should care about that. Like maybe not everybody's gonna care about Jefferson dying on a farm in Wisconsin, but a lot of people are gonna care about like Social Security. And so we do want that content to get to people. So maybe that's a small way to answer.
But just to be clear, I meant the community being besieged. I didn't mean trust in journalism being greater.
Okay.
Government.
Okay. Thanks.
Could I just want to chime in with one thing, which I think you already are challenging some of the traditional norms. So you mentioned earlier that you have clearance from editors and your stories run with a first name only or a last name only. And that actually is a change. And it's something I just went a few rounds in the ring with a national news organization that was refusing to cede any ground on the idea that they had to have a real first name and a real last name in stories about immigration enforcement. And I said, well, wait a minute. You mentioned that the rule of law is changing or maybe dissolving. We've got people being plucked off the streets. If ever there's a case for minimizing harm by running only a first name, this would be it. And so ProPublica, I think, is one of those organizations that has looked at this idea of extractive reporting and said, well, wait, what are some practices that don't diminish the quality and the trustworthiness of the journalism and yet can help us minimize the harm? So I think you already are doing some of this, and you made me cry. Anthony would indeed be thrilled to have you here tonight. I would say, please do go to the guide on less extractive reporting, and she buried the lead, but Natalie wrote that guide, and it is the single most used resource on the Center for Journalism Ethics website. So do we have one? Yay, you! Do we have one last question? We have time for one more question. Right there.
It's not actually a question, it's a comment. Okay. And it, I think, speaks to some extent what you were saying, but also what you were talking about in terms of like lack of people covering things. And I think we have to acknowledge the financial crisis that the journalism industry is experiencing and the closure and shrinking of news outlets in communities, particularly small communities around the country. And so it's not just about language skills. It's like if people can't have jobs or their job requires them to produce 5 stories a day, there's no capacity.
No, agreed. My first internship was at my local newspaper in a little suburb of Detroit that I don't think exists anymore. Like, yeah.
AI isn't going to fix that?
AI apparently does. Did anybody read about the Cleveland Plain Dealer? Like, what's happening? They like have reporters who who do reporting and they plug it into the AI machine and it produces a story that a human reads. Like, it's mind blowing. I don't know what's going to happen.
Okay, we're going to end on an optimistic note. Sorry. Those of you who are my students who want to go do this work, I'd actually like you to just reflect on 1 or 2 ways in which you have seen the power of your hard work in action. So I know, because I am a total fangirl of that traffic enforcement, still that story just like, just thought about something in a just like you were describing about your editor asking this very basic question. You just thought about something like a 4-year-old would think about it, and it led to these massive changes in people's lives. I mean, how much debt forgiveness was there?
It was millions of dollars.
Millions of dollars. Yeah. So give us 1 or 2 other examples where you've seen the power of the work that you put in and the way that you do that work.
I mean, here, I think Lola's in the room. The work on, so that story about that little boy who died, I had a whole plan for different stories we were going to do about dairy, like about wages, injuries, housing, this, that, and we didn't get to all of them. We never did a story about housing. But we wrote in that story that little boy lived above a milking parlor, like above, just like a really horrible conditions. And I didn't have to do a whole investigation on housing. And like Dane County, like set up an $8 million fund to study conditions for farm workers in the county and hopefully build housing for them. That was amazing. And kind of like a smaller thing, I spent on and off some time writing about immigrant kids who are in this kind of federal shelter system, like when they cross the border. And there was a moment when were like left Afghanistan, there were all these like, I don't even remember how this happened, but there were a bunch of unaccompanied Afghan kids who ended up coming back into the US, and they were like filled shelters like in the Chicago area. And like we learned that conditions were awful for them. The staff there was prepared for Latino kids, not Afghani kids. And there was no interpreters. There was no basic like cultural competency. And like there was interpretation afterward. It was like a small thing, but sometimes it surprises me. It doesn't always happen. Like most stories don't generate a ton of impact. And on immigration, it's really hard because it's the federal level. But it happens. It happens. Like we have like an impact report that's like full of stuff that like my colleagues have helped create, like laws and people freed from prison. And it's stunning.
Well, I think it's also stunning the impact that maybe you can't measure, which is the minds that you've changed and the light bulbs that have gone on over heads like mine about things that are happening just down the road from where we live that I had no idea of this little boy's story. And you told it with truthfulness, but you also told it with heart and integrity. And that's what we like to celebrate here. So thank you so much for being with us, and thank you, Natalie, for your expert interviewing skills. You are a credit. Thank you very much. We hope you'll all check out the Center for Journalism Ethics website, the Anthony Shadid Award for Journalism Ethics, which has remarkable journalism in it, and the Guide for Extractive Reporting.